Hi, this is my review of The Red Tide, Adventure in a Crimson World. This is a campaign sourcebook, but it's also a sandbox toolkit. That is, you have all the information to have adventures in this exotic fantasy world that is also the featured setting of Scarlet Heroes. If you haven't watched my review for that excellent glorious solo role-playing game that also works great as a one-on-one experience or with a small group, and even as a cooperative experience, I'm going to put a link in the description below. But this Red Tide book also has all the tables, all the materials, all the information to create your own campaign setting or modify the existing campaign setting. This is compatible with Labyrinth Lord, but it's also compatible with any other D20 based system, maybe Lamentations of a Flame Princess. With a few minor tweaks, you could also convert it to Pathfinder or maybe 13th Age. And you could also use it with other systems, perhaps Bexith, RuneQuest, maybe Dungeons and Trolls, etc. There are many ways in which you can use this sourcebook. Now, let's talk about the quality of the PDF. The quality is excellent as expected of any book produced by Kevin Crawford. It's well organized, well written, with a dry style that doesn't feel boring. It explains things clearly without wasting time. It's fully bookmarked. You have awesome old school looking illustrations. Some of them feel a bit like stock art. I think I've seen them in other PDFs and books as well, but they fit the setting. And you have, well, when it comes to tables and tools and elements that you can use to create your own world or play around with this Red Tide setting, the PDF is just awesome. It's very complete, and even though it's just 173 pages long, it feels like it's around 400 pages. It's one of those books that has a lot of content. Now, let's talk about the contents. The Red Tide. The story is quite detailed and rich, but I'm going to give you a small summary of what happened. The Red Tide is somewhat of a post-apocalyptic setting, fantasy setting that is, because there was basically this place that feels a lot like China. It's the Celestial Empire. You will see many real-world parallels when it comes to the inhabitants and cultures in this Red Tide setting. So you're going to see Nordic people. You will also see some others that feel Japanese, others that look more like on the Hebrew side of things. You're going to see Middle Eastern people. You're going to see some that are British, etc. So you have many cultures mixed in this campaign setting. So the Celestial Empire was quite prosperous, but there was this archmage in the Celestial Empire known as Lamach, and Lamach has sort of like a character of like a Hebrew wizard sort of characteristics. And he, through his clairvoyance and far-seeing, he detected that there was this threat coming, the Red Tide, that is kind of like a miasma. It's this fog-like force that covers everything, devours everything, and sometimes it destroys the things that it devours, but many times it also corrupts those things. In a sense, it feels a bit like a Warhammer Fantasy, in that kind of like the chaos conflict that you do not know who is corrupted and such. So this Red Tide is moving forward, and he they told the ruler of the Celestial Empire that the Red Tide was coming, but he was ignored. Oh, you're so silly, nothing's going to happen, you're just delusional. But of course the threat was real, but Lamach started to create a fleet to rescue all of the people from the Celestial Empires, and eventually the Red Tide did come and it devastated the Celestial Empire, and the Emperor, finally seeing his own foolishness and mistake, he gave Lamach the regalia of the Celestial Empire. So Lamach traveled far, escaping with his fleet escaping from the now corrupted and taken over Celestial Empire, and he joined up with other fleets as well. So you have pretty much all the people in the world traveling in this giant fleet and going to the only safe place, which are the Sunset Isles. Now, the Sunset Isles have some almost inexplicable quality of repelling the red tide. Lamach managed to detect this through his magic and scrying. I'm not going to reveal this the nature of why the Sunset Isles repel the red tide, because maybe some game masters could consider it vital as a sort of like a secret to be revealed later on, although it seems to be open information, but even so. So they arrive to these Sunset Isles, but these isles are not unpopulated. The Shu, which are kind of like the orcs of the setting, not exactly, I will get into that later on. They live in the Sunset Isles and they do not like invaders, and without even trying to establish some sort of diplomacy, they started attacking the newcomers, and they had to defend themselves. That is, all of the people from the Celestial Empire and the different people such as the Iron Guarders or the Ishkanti, they had to fight back, and they managed to repel the Shu and start to build their new empire using existing ruins. The Sunset Isles are quite mysterious because there seems to have been many civilizations before the Shu, and you're going to find all these different ruins and forgotten temples and monoliths. So there's a lot of room for exploring those mysteries. So the Celestial Empire was reborn in the Sunset Isles, but the Shu still kept attacking the newcomers, and eventually this new Shu witch appeared and unified the tribes and started like a military campaign against all of the invaders of the Sunset Isles. And they had to band together, but the Shu were quite unstoppable. Many of the different new created realms were almost destroyed. So, for example, some of them had to perform forbidden pacts with demons. Some others would have to engage in forbidden blood magic that actually sacrificed people to produce powerful spells. Some others didn't have magic and were just really well trained, like the Iron Guarders, and they took a heavy blow. But the Shu kept advancing towards the Celestial Empire, where the Celestial Empire is kind of like the bastion of hope. And they were about to be defeated, but there was this group of unknown adventurers that actually infiltrated to the very heart of the Shu Empire and managed to kill this witch queen. And so the Shu were disbanded and defeated, but they were still licking their wounds and waiting for their chance to attack once again. So the land of the setting the Red Tide is quite devastated because of the Red Tide and by the Shu Wars. So it's, as I was telling you, it has that strong post-apocalyptic feel to it, and some places are kind of like wastelands. But overall, it has a very exotic flavor to it as well. Particularly like an Asian setting. It feels a bit like Oriental adventures at times. Now let's talk about the people that live here. All of the races are quite standard. You have different types of humans, and I was telling you, some look Asian, some others are more on the western side of things. So you're going to see many interesting warriors. It's not going to be uncommon to perhaps see a samurai wielding a Zweihander, or maybe you're going to see a pirate that uses a shuriken to attack. So it has that sort of like mixed flavor to it. And when it comes to the demi-humans, they were actually humans at first in ancient times, but because of different things, they turned into different shapes and all sorts of shapes and colors, pretty much. So you have the dwarves that were actually humans that were enslaved by this evil deity, sort of like a feminine goddess of domination, and they became dwarves because she had them working underground. But they eventually killed that evil goddess. But the war continues in the other side, on the other world, after death. So the dwarves are kind of like obsessed in finding gold, because gold is sort of like a spiritual source of power that they use in their fight against the dead goddess in the other world. So they have a sort of like a fatalistic feel to them. And then you have the elves, who were also human at first, but they tried to become immortal, but something went wrong in their experiment, and their bodies shaped in the way that we know elves look like, with their pointed ears and sort of like fine features. But they're trapped in a sort of like a cycle of reincarnation. And then we have the halflings, and in this setting they are quite different from other halflings. Here, halflings are too brave, are almost inhumanly so, to put it in a way. They were humans that decided to reject all things related to deities, and because of that they became quite short. Like, they stopped receiving that source of energy that gave them taller bodies. But in exchange, the halflings, because they do not fear anything hellish or divine, they are incredibly brave, and so they are more some of the more fearsome fighters in the setting. And then you have the show, as I was telling you, that they are not exactly like orcs, but the Iron Girders, which have strong Nordic presence, to put it in a way. They compare them to different orcs, goblins, bugbears, and hobgoblins, because they have different, the show have different constitutions and sizes and all that, and they would actually pass as humans if they weren't all terribly scarred and using tattoos and piercings. That makes them look a bit more savage. So the show are kind of like orcs by default, but not exactly because of their nature. In this book you have all the details on the climate, the lay of the land, about traveling, wilderness encounters, encounter tables, and because the Sunset Isles are quite extensive, but you have two major isles, Ektau and Aktau, and you have all the details on that, on different interaction, on places of importance, and different hex maps and color maps to better understand the weather and climate. And you have all the details on state and society, on the different conflicts that could arise, because, for example, the Mandarinate of Shan, which are the successors of the Celestial Empire, they are allies, for example, because with the Hohenberg Pact, the Iron Guarders, but at the same time they have sort of like an enmity with the Shogunate of the North, because the Shogun of the North made this pact with demons, so they aren't exactly good guys now. And they have, the Mandarinate has a sort of like an uneasy alliance with the magocracy of Tianlong, which were the magicians who performed those forbidden rites. So the situation is quite unbalanced and not exactly stable. And you have all the details on the different deities, the Nine Immortals, the Skandar gods, the Maker, which is sort of like the closest thing to God probably in this setting. Then you have the Hell Kings, and details on the godless races. And you have details on the different character classes, because as I was telling you, this is more to be used with Labyrinth Lord, but as I was telling you as well, it's quite easy to convert it to other systems. So you have details on clerics, dwarves, and elves. You have a subclass for the elves, which is the Scion Weird, which is kind of like an elf with an ability to, because he has access to those past lives memories, he has the ability to wield different time and space manipulating effects. You have details on fighters, halflings, on different show and their classes, such as the show witch and the show witch progression of spells. You only have one show class. And you also have the Vowed. And the Vowed are kind of like the monks, but they can also be customized to be played as ninja in this campaign setting. So that's quite nice. It further enhances that Oriental Adventures feel to it. You have all the details on red sorcery, anything related to magic when it comes to casting spells as a wizard or as a cleric. And some of the spells are quite colorful. It's quite easy to customize from a thematic point of view your particular sorcerer or wizard or shaman or whatever you decide to call him or her. Because, for example, in Tianlong, the wizards use the stitched path of magic, which is basically kind of like soul grafts. So it's quite going to be quite fun to customize your spells. Maybe you're casting a magic missile, but you say, to cast the magic missile, I reach out and take the soul of someone that has died and use his that essence to throw the magic missile in the shape of perhaps like a spectral bone. So it's going to be quite fun to play around with those thematic details of magic. And you have details on different spells specific to classes and races. So you have Scion Weird, magical effects and spells, Show Witch spells. details on creating magical items and styling them, magical equipment. And you have bestiary with many creatures that, even though some are quite classic, you're going to find constructs, basically golems and different types of demons. They still have that hint of an oriental flavor to them. And you have details on the tide spawn, which are probably some of my favorite monsters to use in this setting, because they have a chaotic and cultist-like character to them, and they're quite monstrous. And as I was telling you, they kind of like enhance that Warhammer fantasy aspect of the Red Tide. And you have details on the Houses of the Lost. That is all details concerning a sandbox, how to prepare your campaign. There's a lot of good advice here to manage any sort of campaign, details on how to manage campaign folders, for example, and how to create different sites, what happens between sessions, different ways to have, for example, court intrigues, details on borderland sites. This PDF contains tables and tables and tables on anything that you can imagine that is useful to create a successful campaign setting and to further modify this setting of the Red Tide. I cannot stress that enough. You have different city sites, ruin sites, the classical system of tags that is like a staple of Kevin Crawford's other games and settings. You have details on different inhabitants, so you can customize the same place can be used over and over again, but because you're going to modify things thematically and in gameplay elements, it's going to have its own flavor. Because, for example, maybe you have ruins, and in one ruin, everything features ancient constructs. So you're going to find like porcelain servitors, ancient war golems, black jade juggernauts. But what if your ruins have to do with more of like a dwarven theme to it? Maybe they are evil dwarves, so you're going to find dwarven outcasts, dwarven elders and chieftains. Or maybe it's a ruin completely controlled by hell cultists, so you're going to find infernal priests, red jade templars, or maybe even demons, of course. So there's a lot of material here to create many different adventure sites and modify them countless times. And you also have a chapter that is called The Secrets of the Mist, and this is pretty much a referee chapter with all the secrets on the setting. I'm not going to talk too much about it because of the potential spoilers, but here you have the details on the nature of the Red Tide and what the tide is after. Is it actually intelligent? Or what is this miasma after? Details on the show and using the show in your game. Details on the gods. And you have so many game resources. You have quick cult creation, a quick cult creation process. You have dwarven names, Gadal names, halfling names. You have different room dressings to create your own dungeons, tables and tables and tables, and like details on unfinished rooms, prison cells, torture chambers, mortuaries, cold storages, etc, etc, etc. And you have a lot of blank maps for you to create your own dungeons, or maybe to use them in an emergency, because this is a sandbox type of campaign. Maybe your players are going to some unexpected directions, and you could use any of these maps in an emergency, or sections of these maps for those emergency adventure sites. There's a lot of cool material here, and an entire map detailing the campaign setting with all of those map keys detailing swamps, forests, mountains, etc. You also have blank sheets to create your own dungeons divided by letters and numbers, sort of like a coordinate system. And you even have like a pre-generated dungeon with keys to different encounters and rooms. And at the end you have a well-organized index as well. So what do I think of the Red Tide campaign sourcebook and sandbox toolkit? This book is pretty good. It's excellent. I cannot express how much I like it. I think there's an important consideration. Some of you could already have the Scarlet Heroes role-playing game, and that RPG contains a lot of information concerning the Red Tide sourcebook, but it's still not enough in my opinion. I know a lot of you are going to be thinking, I already have Scarlet Heroes, why do I really need this? And I would say that yes, unless you are really casual in the way that you play Scarlet Heroes, this Red Tide sourcebook contains tons and tons and tons of information. expands the campaign setting presented in Scarlet Heroes tremendously. You have a lot of ideas for new adventures, new campaigns. You could even play around with all of these new tables of the campaign setting to further enhance the solo and cooperative aspect of Scarlet Heroes. And for those of you that enjoy Labyrinth Lord or any D20 based system, I also highly recommend it if you like an exotic fantasy setting, or even if you want to build your own setting. Here you have all the tools for that. And as I was telling you, it's also quite worth it to convert it to other systems. So I really must recommend this one, because even, for example, even if you do not like exotic fantasy settings such as this one, there are just so many tools to create your own or modify other campaign settings as well. So definitely consider getting the Red Tide. And if you're a fan of Kevin Crawford, you probably already own some of his other role-playing games, Other Dust, Stars Without Number, Godbound, and this is compatible with all of that. Maybe there's some sort of portal that takes characters from that setting to the Red Tide, so it's going to be quite useful for that. Or maybe you can take some inspiration or elements from the Red Tide and use it with those other games. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.